I'm a believer in serendipity in life, and I want to tell the story of how it is that I come to this particular moment through Representative Rosenthal. So I've written this book on climate change. I'm Rob Hogg, whatever works, Hogg, it works. My family's always said Hogg, so I'm stuck with that. So I'm a state senator from Cedar Rapids in Iowa and the author of this new book, America's Climate Century, which I'm really excited about. Well, my dad happens to live in the Denver area. After my mom died, he got remarried, and you know how those things go. My stepmother has children who live in the Colorado, in Denver, and then out in the mountains. And so my dad, having taught me that marriage is about compromise, you do whatever your wife wants, when he decides to retire, they move out here. So I'm out here visiting my dad, carpooled over here with my sister who is coming, and you know, take advantage of those opportunities to get out here when I can. And I thought to myself, well, you know, Colorado is a really, really important state, and I should probably check out what's going on in climate change out in Colorado. So what do? I put those magic words into that magic machine called Google, and lo and behold, here comes Representative Paul Rosenthal up, because Colorado Legislature just passed a bill this year to establish the position of a climate czar. What's the official?
I don't like the word czar.
Yeah.
Coordinator.
A climate coordinator for the state, to put a person in charge of all things climate change in the state of Colorado, and that's a good accomplishment. Let me tell you, having served in the legislature for 11 years, when you can do positive things like that, you want to do them. And we've had some success stories like that over the year in Iowa. But this was what caught my attention. In the article in the Denver Post, Representative Rosenthal was quoted as saying, "It's really no different than what Joseph did in Egypt, which was to take the good years and to prepare for the bad." I thought I was the only one in the country who used that story. And if you open up the book into the Faith and Climate section, you'll see that story, which I've been using for nearly 15 years now. And I might actually get into that a little bit. And in fact, I may come back to that later tonight. So anyway, Representative Rosenthal, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to the state and our country and our world. Well, dads. Let's talk about dads just for a minute. So, you know how dads like to think about what their kids do. And my dad would really like it if I would spend more time practicing law and make more money. That's what he'd really like me to do, because he thinks that's what kids are supposed to do. And I try to tell him, well, you know, Dad, I have 3 kids and I like to spend a lot of time with my kids. And I also have this issue that I just feel compelled to work on because it's so important. So we've had this conversation over the years, and I practiced a little bit of law, but not very much. I try to minimize that. And so today, my dad goes in to take a nap, but first he gets a telephone call, and he's talking to one of his friends, and he says, "Oh yeah, and my son's out here, and he's on this environmental kick." Right? Don't you love that? This environmental kick. And I thought to myself, well, that's good for my, he's doing a good job there. And the only problem with it is, it's not a kick. In my view, it is the defining moral challenge of our time and the defining historical challenge of our time. There are lots of important issues out there, but if we get this issue wrong, every other issue we care about is going to prove to be nothing more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Right? This is a really, really important and serious issue, and none of us asked for it, but you look on what's going on around the world and you see all this crazy stuff happening, one thing after another, and at some point you have to say, well, we got to deal with it. And not only do we need to deal with it, but in my view we need to make it the central national purpose of our country. Just like in my parents' generation, my dad didn't want to fight in World War II, but he did it. And my mom and dad didn't really want to be involved in a Cold War for decades, but our country did it. And the same kind of magnitude as those challenges, this is the defining historical issue of our time. It is the great moral challenge, and the question is, are we going to be able to find a way for 7 billion people to live on this planet sustainably without rendering it uninhabitable or significantly degraded for future generations. So we need to get to work on it. Let me do a few things. I'm going to read a couple passages from the book tonight. By the way, the books tonight, I want everybody in the room who wants a book to get a book. Do not worry about paying for them or anything like that. If you want a book, I want to make sure you go home tonight with a book. I am, if you're able, contributions of $5, $10, $20 for an organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, which is doing congressional district by congressional district organizing it. Betsy House is here tonight representing that group. I don't think you're the only one involved in the group. Some others. So thank you for being here. I do want to introduce a couple other people in the audience. We've got Elias Burgos. Is that close? Okay, Elias Burgos, who's the new director of Colorado Interfaith Power and Light, which is a group that's working on climate change and energy issues from a faith-based perspective. So thank you for being here tonight. I've got my long-term friends, Lindsay and Lauren, did I get that right? From Environment Colorado. I want to thank you for being here tonight. David Ellenberger from the National Wildlife Federation. Thank you, David, for being here. And just a fantastic organization the National Wildlife Federation is, introducing millions of young children to nature and a relationship with nature. And of course, the great work that Larry Schweiger, their national president and CEO, does on fighting climate change. Larry and I had a great 2-day tour through Iowa a couple years ago, and let me tell you, it was fun. So anyway, the book is there. I'd like you to get it. And I want to spend a few minutes here talking about the issue, because I've made this claim that I think it's the defining historical issue of our time. It needs to be what everything else, American government, state government, everything else that we do needs to be based on that. Let me give you an example of what I'm saying by this. Why was it that John Kennedy, as president, finally decided that he needed to do something about civil rights? I'm rereading Parting the Waters by Taylor Branch right now. Why was it that he did that? Was it because he just felt so much compassion for the African Americans who were getting bitten by the dogs and fire hosed? Well, maybe that was part of it. Elected officials, when they act, they have multiple reasons, and it's complicated. But the driving force for President Kennedy standing up and saying we finally need to do something about civil rights was the extraordinary embarrassment that response to that movement was causing for the United States globally. It was pretty hard for President Kennedy to convince people in Asia and Latin America and Africa that in the global struggle in the Cold War that you ought to side with the United States instead of the Soviet Union, when every day there were images being shown around the world of young black men and women getting bitten by dogs and fire hosed, right? And that, because the central organizing principle of our politics at that time was the Cold War. And everything that was done was measured by it. Why was it that Bobby Kennedy approved wiretaps on Martin Luther King? Same deal, because he was motivated because J. Edgar Hoover was telling him that Martin Luther King was a communist, right? So we now need to transform this country and make this fight against climate change, this fight for sustainability, the new organizing principle. It is that fundamental to what we're going to do. The issue has long been talked about we've got to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm going to get to that. That's a very important part of this issue. But we are now living in a time when we also have to deal with the reality of what I call climate disasters in the book. I represent the city of Cedar Rapids, and in 2008, we had an unprecedented flood. We had never had the Cedar River go above 21 feet at flood stage. It went to 31 feet. 25,000 people were forced out of their homes. 1,000 businesses had to temporarily close, including the law firm where I practice, and even though we were on the second story of a building. 80% of our city government was put underwater, including the jail, the police station, the fire department, the county administration building, the city administration building, even the public library in the worst non-fire disaster in American library history, right? This was awful. Nobody died, but it cost my small city of 125,000 people nearly $5 billion in damage, okay? Now, that's a small flood in a small city in Iowa. You all watch the news and you hear the stories. Just since the book came out, record flooding in San Antonio that killed 2 people. Flooding in Arkansas kills 3 people. Flooding in Iowa, again, that killed a person in New Hartford. Wildfires in Arizona, Colorado. Record heat in Alaska. Throughout the month of June, into the 90s in Alaska. Record heat. And of course, the deadly tornadoes in Oklahoma. And just since I've been here, you see it again. Flash flooding in Denver. There was a story about a wolf sanctuary that had been flooded badly earlier this year. And of course, there was a photograph in yesterday's Denver Post about the drought in China, right? All kinds of extraordinary things. These disasters are coming at us so frequently that it's hard to remember them. How many of you are just so concerned about the record flooding that Tropical Storm Lee brought to Pennsylvania, right? We forget about these things. The record flooding of Hurricane Irene in Vermont, the record flooding from Hurricane Isaac last year, and of course all of that pales because then it comes along a big event like Hurricane Sandy, which, oh yeah, was that something really bad on the East Coast, right? These things are just happening so often. And the problem is the scientists say that we are already irreversibly committed to more warming because of the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And I go through this in the book, and they say the severity of the impacts of climate change will increase substantially in the coming decades. That's the downside of this issue. This is the harsh reality of that issue. And we need to get ready for it. There are lots of things we need to do to get ready for it. I've spent most of my time the last 4 years trying to get the state of Iowa to prepare for future flooding. Not easy to do, is it, Representative Rosenthal? No. I mean, it is a constant battle to try to get a state ready. We need so many things to get ready for the changes that are irreversibly coming at us. This is a fight for survival. This is not a feel-good thing where the issue's just going to go away. We will now all be living with climate change the rest of our lives, even if we do everything I say that we ought to do. We got to get ready. So ecological monitoring, infrastructure built for extreme events, investing in our natural resources so that we can give native plants and native wildlife a chance to survive. Being generous with disaster relief. I remember a news story I saw a couple years ago where the Red Cross said they were running a $7 million deficit one year. There were so many disasters coming at them, right? It's hard to continue to be generous time after time when these disasters happen, but that is something that Americans are called to do in the 21st century. Let me just make a note. A lot of people there are a lot of skeptics out there. We all know them. Mainstream science may have rejected them, but we all know them because they talk to us. It's okay to be a doubting Thomas. I say it in the book. In my faith, doubting Thomas is a great Christian leader who just happened to kind of question it just a little bit there, right? So being a doubting Thomas is not a bad thing. Being skeptical is not a bad thing, but you have to pay attention to reality, and you have to watch what's going on and be willing to change your views as things change. If Hurricane Sandy doesn't get us to take action, what will it take? If an unprecedented storm through New York City, which has a very, very long weather record, an unprecedented storm surge, if that doesn't get us to take action, what will it take? Hurricane Sandy also gives every elected official an opportunity to change their mind. If they've been, oh, maybe we don't want to do anything on climate change, it's an opportunity to change their minds. And that's there, that opportunity is there. But final thing, even without climate change, even without it, all these things I've just talked about doing to get prepared for future disasters, well, that's something we need to get prepared for, right? If we want to safeguard our people and our property, we should at least be prepared to guard against things that have already happened historically, like the Dust Bowl. We ought to be prepared for that, or the floods of the past, the 1927 Mississippi River flood. We ought to be prepared for stuff like that. Here's why climate change is so important, though. It makes the need to prepare that much more urgent. We can't rest on our laurels and think, yeah, we'll deal with it as it comes. We've got to anticipate it. We've got to get ready. Now, I said earlier that obviously a big part of this issue is reducing greenhouse gases. And at the same time that we need to get ready for these more frequent and severe disasters that are happening all around us, we also need to get ready urgently by slashing our greenhouse gas emissions, by moving beyond fossil fuels, and by leaving fossil fuels in the ground. I've been talking a little too long here. Let me share a passage from the book that I think conveys the urgency and the hopeful signs that we can actually do this. So let me share a passage from the book. For 30 years, Americans have debated whether to prevent global warming through emission reductions or to try to adapt to climate changes as they happen. The truth is, we have used the debate as an excuse to do nothing, and the reality is we now urgently need to do both. Like Americans before us who had to deal with global crises such as World War II and the Cold War, we have to deal with climate change. Some Americans have resisted climate action for fear it would require us to give up our way of life. But the changes we need to make do not require the greatest sacrifices in our history, not even close. We do need to make changes. We need to leave fossil fuels in the ground by using less energy, less electricity, and less gasoline. We need more energy efficiency and energy conservation. We need 100% renewable electricity. We need transportation solutions like fuel-efficient cars, electric vehicles, rail, and Main Street and downtown revitalization. We also need more staycations and teleconferencing instead of air travel, and more walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly communities. We need more investment in infrastructure to withstand extreme weather events, and we need to protect and enhance our natural resources so native wildlife and native plants can survive climate change. We need more Americans to choose to live simply so that others may simply live. But a life of drudgery is not required. What is required is for Americans to demand that our political leaders take national climate action. The fight against climate change must become our new national purpose. We must tell our elected officials and candidates that we support policies and we are willing to make changes in our lives to fight climate change and achieve sustainability. And the good news is, while slashing our greenhouse gas emissions, we can build stronger, safer, healthier, more vibrant, and more prosperous communities now and for future generations. That is the good news. Thank you. That is the good news. I talked about the skeptics, and they'll say, well, we don't believe in climate change, and I go through in the book in detail how you can try to deal with it, and it's worth doing. I've got the ever-handy 8-page appendix called Responding to Doubting Thomas, where I took 18 of the most frequent things I hear and give you a brief response to try to give you a tool as you talk to people about climate change and deal with the skeptics. I've talked about the skeptics. Well, you got to prepare for disasters anyway, so let's do that. Here's the other thing. On the energy side, these solutions work. They work. Skeptics can't be opposed to saving money by reducing energy use. They can't be. They can't be opposed to using renewable energy resources rather than depletable resources. That's a good thing. And I just want to tell you, in Iowa, and I'm sure it's true in Denver, I just don't know it, but we see signs all around us of the solutions working. 5 years ago, the largest solar production facility in the state of Iowa was at a Franciscan eco-spirituality center across the street from my Senate district in Hiawatha, Iowa, right? 7 kilowatts. You know, and the sisters were doing great work there, and they've doubled that now, right? Fantastic. That has been repeatedly passed 100 times in Iowa with new solar developments. The largest photovoltaic array in our state right now is 280 kilowatts at Luther College in Decorah, a Lutheran school. 40 times larger in just 5 years. And later this year, Farmers Electric Co-op in Kelowna, Iowa, which is a Mennonite-based community, is going to build the largest photovoltaic array in the state of 500 kilowatts. So why would conservative Mennonites in Kelowna build 500 kilowatts of solar power? It's because it works and it saves them money. They make the investment and they get the electricity basically for free. This stuff works. Another story, energy efficiency, green buildings. Van Meter Incorporated, an employee-owned business in Cedar Rapids, had to build a new warehouse. And they wanted to demonstrate what they could do. So they built a LEED Platinum certified warehouse. Got solar on the top, everything energy efficient in the building. You know what their electrical bill was for their first year of operation? $330, right? Well, I know people in my district who will use $330 of electricity in a month, right? This stuff works. It saves money, it improves health, it's more sustainable, it builds prosperity. So the good news is that the solutions work. Now, let me finish about what we're going to, and then we'll have as much questions and discussions as people want. So, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? This is a big issue. This is the challenge of our generation. What do we need to do? Well, there are lots of things we need to do. There is something everybody can do in this country to help on this effort. There is no person who can't do something to help by conserving energy, by investing in renewable energy, by taking individual action, community action, and most important, by being a good citizen. Our most important job is as a citizen. After 11 years in office, I will tell you, people need to speak up. We need to get more people more involved to speak up more often about climate change. And it's okay to do. I would love it. Some people think, well, I need a bill to talk about, right? I got to know what the bill number is. No, you don't. You need to tell Representative Rosenthal, climate change is important. Senator Hogg, climate change is important to me. And what I like to tell people is, every time you do something in your life to try to be more sustainable in your personal life, tell an elected official about it. You decide to carpool with a friend on a trip, tell an elected official about it. You decide to add more recycling at home, tell an elected official about it. You decide to put in LED lighting in your home to get the most advanced energy efficiency, great. Tell an elected official about it. You need to consistently communicate with your elected officials, and you need to get organized to do it. There are so many groups that need help. Citizens Climate Lobby's one, Colorado Interfaith Power and Light's another, 350.org's another, National Wildlife Federation needs help, Environment Colorado needs help. We need people to be involved, be engaged, and to speak up for climate action. So do this. In the book, I talk about some groups that I really like. One of them is Climate Parents, new national group, Climate Parents. It's a web-based group, but that's a great group because as parents, we care about our children, so we care about this issue. In Iowa, a great new group, 100 Grannies for a Livable Future. Right? That's a fantastic organization. And as the Reverend Barbara Schlachter, who formed that organization, said, you know what? This is a problem that we've largely created, and it's going to be left largely with our grandchildren, so it's time for us to go get arrested. And she went out to D.C. on the Keystone pipeline protest, and she got arrested. Last week, 45 people got arrested trying to shut down the largest coal burning plant in New England. I mean, there are actions happening across our country, and that's good to have people speaking up and demanding action. Another great group, Climate Patriots. That's another great group formed by a retired Vice Admiral of the United States Navy, Dennis McGinn, who spoke in Iowa in October of 2011. Well, that's fantastic. We need people to speak up. And why is he speaking up? He says, because climate change is a national security threat. So what we need to do is to get more people more involved. We need to get organized. We need to get after President Obama and ask him to do more. And we have to ask Congress to do more. As you have to ask. If you don't ask, they won't. Well, that may be the case, but you still have to ask. And as people have asked me, how do we get President Obama to do more? You know what my first advice to him is? Tell President Obama you've talked to your congressman. Put the pressure on Congress in addition to the president so that the president has some cover to act if he wants to act, and I do believe he wants to act. A couple final things I want to mention. In Iowa, we have had a series of events where we have had coordinated action across our state asking our congressional representatives to do things. February 15th, I said to myself, a lot of people were going to DC to protest Keystone. Remember that? A lot of you remember that? And it was great if you went. But I said there are a lot of people in Iowa who don't have the time, money, or carbon budget to do that. So we coordinated something called Climate Action Across Iowa, where over 100 Iowans on the same day went to 21 congressional offices in 10 cities across Iowa. We got some press coverage on that, and we made a statement. We did again. Citizens Climate Lobby recently had its National Lobby Days out in DC. Again, time, money, carbon budget. A lot of Iowans aren't going to go to that. But they could pick up their phones and call Congress. And over 55 people reported to me that they'd called our entire congressional delegation and asked them to support carbon fee and dividend legislation and other action to fight climate change. So we can do that. In October, we're going to be running a campaign called Remember Hurricane Sandy and remember the victims of Hurricane Sandy. We're going to be asking our congressional representatives, have you done anything since Hurricane Sandy to fight climate change and get our country ready for future disasters? We will be asking that question October 22nd through 28th, and we're also going to be having a series of candlelight vigils and other commemorations of that disaster and other disasters that weekend, or that week. Finally, I also want to put in a plug for an event being organized by, led by some Iowans, but not just Iowans, called the Great March for Climate Action. They are trying to get 1,000 people to walk across the country next year from California to Washington, D.C., March 1st through November 1st. They have over 100 people signed up already, and maybe there's somebody in this room who would like to walk across the country and help on that effort. That would be great if you do. They are also expecting to come through Colorado during the month of June, and they're looking for people to help host that as they do that. So if you're interested in that would be fantastic. Finally, I just want to say this. You know what? I'm going to read another passage from the book. If I can find it. Some people say that America can't do it anymore. Don't believe that for a second. America has always been able to shake off its self-doubt to lead the world to do great things. In his book, Freedom from Fear, historian David Kennedy tells the story that before the United States entered World War II, President Roosevelt wanted to order 15,000 aircraft, but the Army Air Force Chief of Staff asked, what are we going to do with 15,000 planes? 5 years later, the United States had built over 300,000 aircraft, helped win the war, and preserve freedom for the world. We can still take the bold action we need to fight climate change if we are determined, compassionate, innovative, and inspired. Let's slash our energy use through energy efficiency and conservation. Let's produce 100% renewable electricity. Let's make every new and renovated building a green building. Let's build electric vehicles and an electric vehicle infrastructure. Let's rebuild rail. Let's revitalize our downtowns and main streets. Let's grow local healthy foods. Let's prepare our cities, our watersheds, and our states so we can survive the climate disasters of the future. And let's lead the world to slash greenhouse gas emissions and keep our climate safe for future generations. In the climate century, this is our national purpose. I truly believe that together and working together, we can take the action that we urgently need to build the safe, peaceful, healthy, prosperous, vibrant, sustainable future that we so urgently need. And with that, I want to thank you for coming and see if there are questions or comments for the good of the group.
Senator Hogg, I appreciate your comments about how we mobilized during World War II and so on. But it seems to me that the threat today is categorically different than the threat we faced in 1940, where you had the Axis powers were organizing and they were taking over other countries. They were an imminent threat to Britain. Climate change is different. It's almost invisible to many people. There are many people who just say this is just a cyclical thing that happens every 100,000 years, and there's no proof that it's really human caused. So there are millions of people that feel that way, and particularly in certain parts of the country. I don't know how we overcome that inertia. I think that's a huge problem. Even if you talk about, a lot of people are afraid that what we need to do to affect climate change is going to have an adverse effect on the GDP. And how do you convince them that that's not true? How do you encourage people to have smaller families? Without, people are still having 6, 7 children, and what do you say to them?
Well, those are big questions. And in part, I'm not concerned about if the people who are concerned speak up. The people who are concerned need to speak up. We need to get organized and we need to speak up. I talk about, some people like to say, oh, Rob, you're just preaching to the choir. Well, choirs need members. They need practice. They need songs to sing. They need publicity. They need to do a good job, right? So I'm not embarrassed about so-called preaching to the choir. We need people to get organized and speak up. We need to do it in an organized capacity. But you said some things in there that couple of other things, I'll try to respond to them. And just to think about, it's nearly invisible. Climate change is nearly invisible. It's not invisible in Cedar Rapids when we had 31 feet of water running through our downtown. That ain't invisible. It's not invisible to Hurricane Sandy when you have a record storm surge at an unprecedented end of October hurricane. By the way, the Atlantic Ocean was about 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it normally is when that happened. Right? That's not invisible. People across the country are connecting the dots. More and more people are saying, you know what? This ain't normal. And I know they might think, yeah, maybe all this is just a freak coincidence that climate change and global warming has been predicted for decades and now it's kind of happening and that might just be a freak coincidence. There might be people who think that way, but I have found in audiences more and more people are saying, yeah, we're playing a big role in that. So I don't think it is invisible. I think people are connecting the dots. On the GDP, you will never hear me argue that we can do all these things and grow our GDP, even though I do believe that actually has to be true. I think we'll have a more healthy, prosperous future if we do these things. But let me ask it this way. How's that fossil fuel economy been working for you? Right? Our dependence on expensive fossil fuels really hasn't been going too well. And, okay, so we could dig up all this tar crud in Canada and other places and we could frack everything. And maybe if the fossil fuel economy works, gosh, that's going to buy us a couple more decades. It isn't, it's just not, it's not the solution.
You don't have to agree with you. Talk to them, they might give you
Well, I understand. I understand. And let's talk about and I assume Greeley is a frack site. Right. Okay? Let's talk about coal miners. Let's talk about people who work in the fossil fuel industry. Is it their fault? Did they ask for climate change? No. This is one of the things that's going to make this issue very, very difficult. But we've got to remember we're all Americans, and we've got to work with them. And, let me give you a little anecdote. I happen to be a Democrat. In Democratic politics in Iowa, labor unions are really, really important. Labor unions right now favor the construction of the Keystone Pipeline. They also know I'm opposed to it. It doesn't bother them at all, right? They understand that. And let me give you a little anecdote. There's a project being built in the town of Greeley, Iowa, northeast Iowa. 17 2.3 megawatt wind turbines being built. And I was asked, as one of the leading advocates for renewable energy in the Iowa Legislature, to go see that site. You know by who? The Iron Workers Local 89. And those guys, I think they're all guys, don't have to be all guys, but I think they were all guys on that day. They told me there has never been a project that they worked on that they felt better about. They loved building those towers because for them, not only was it a good job and a good wage, installing American-made turbines, they weren't made in Iowa, that was a little flaw with that project, but American-made turbines, because they thought of that as the symbol of energy independence for our country, and that's something they believe in. So I think we can build the relationships and the coalitions that we need to do this. And I'll just tell you, we need to do it. And we need to set aside those doubts that we have and just go out and do it. There were a lot of Americans, I'm going to give you one other anecdote and then we'll go to another question or comment. And this won't mean as much to you, but I just have to share it because of who I am. I'm a big Iowa Hawkeye football fan. And there was a Heisman Trophy winner in 1939 from the University of Iowa named Niall Kinnick. And every Saturday at Kinnick Stadium, named after Niall Kinnick, they play the videotape of him giving his Heisman acceptance speech in the last weekend in November 1939. And for those of you who know your history, you know that World War II had been underway since September. And Niall Kinnick, who's this revered Iowan, gives this speech, probably the only Heisman Trophy winner ever to use a foreign phrase. But he says, I can speak confidently and positively that American boys would much rather grapple for the Heisman Award than for the Croix de Guerre, the French war medal. And obviously, historically, you look at that and you just say, well, he was wrong. I mean, the United States should have been more engaged in Europe. Had we been engaged in Europe from the 1920s, World War II probably would have never happened, right? We should have been engaged, and he was certainly wrong when he blames World War II in that statement by talking about the French war medal. Well, that's not why World War II happened, this revered Iowan said. But the rest of the story, of course, is Niall Kinnick. Once we get involved in World War II and his country asks him to, he enlists and becomes a naval aviator and dies in a crash in the Caribbean, right? People can change the way they think about issues. And here's somebody who was 100% embedded in the view that the United States should stay out of World War II because that's a European struggle that had nothing to do with our national self-interest. And of course, less than 3 years later, he's dead, or 4 years later, he's dead after a plane crash, right? People can change their views. And the good news is on this issue, we're not asking any young Americans to go lay down their lives in a foreign country at all. We're asking people to be good energy consumers and do the right thing and invest in renewable energy, and entrepreneurs have a job to do, and businesses have a job to do, and workers have a job to do. And our most important job that we all can do is our job as citizens and speaking up. But I know it's a challenge. Who else has a question?
Yeah, hi. So I have I'm curious how you would respond to someone like myself who feels like our government has basically been taken over by an economic and banking regime, which is fundamentally at odds with the environmental movement at its foundation, which is it's a system that favors growth, which is why they always have to say, oh, does this going to affect the GDP? And like, for example, World War II, we were involved. We, as in US corporations, were involved well before Hitler got to the point that he got to. Brown Harriman, the IBM, General Motors. So what would you say about this third thing, this monetary and banking system, this economic system that, as far as I can see, is in direct opposition with a healthy, sustainable environmental movement? I'm showing a film coming up called The Light Bulb Conspiracy about planned obsolescence. That's just one example of where the money system favors things that are directly in opposition to the environmental movement, and the fact that this woman over here kind of chuckled about, let's ask our senators. I don't think that that's an unreasonable chuckle, because those of us who are paying attention see over a long period of time how who our so-called representatives actually respond to. So I'm of the belief that our governments, there's been a coup d'etat. This is not the United States government. This is a corporate subsidiary. So how would you respond to that?
Well, there are a lot of systematic structural problems. But I will tell you, having been in elected office for 11 years, that the people with the big money and the corporate interests do not always win. I'm not going to go out and tell you we're going to get to a point where they never win, because I don't think that's realistic. And if you look at the great things America has done in its history, ending slavery, winning in World War II, extending civil rights, I hate to tell you the bad news, but there were businesses and people who profited from that, and we want all Americans to be publicly spirited and to do the right thing. Here's why I think we win on this issue eventually. It's because that's where the reality is. And you know, it's a process of building coalitions and getting organized and working. But we've got to focus on the climate issue at some level and issues of sustainability, because there is a reality to them. And so it is my belief, as we do that and as Americans come together and say we're going to make a change, we can make a change. And yeah, are there going to be little barriers here and there and obstacles and stumbles? Sure. Could it be that we get to the point after 5 years, 10 more years, that we realize, and the country as a whole realizes, the only way we can change this is somehow fixing fixing some other related issue? Sure, that's a possibility. But what I believe is that there is a reality to this, and there is human heartache and trauma, and it actually doesn't matter how rich you are or how poor you are. I mean, it actually does. But being rich and being a powerful corporate interest does not insulate you from the damage that climate change will bring. It will not do that. We are all in this together, fundamentally. We are all in this together. You cannot wall yourself off from this problem. You can't do it. I think about, I'll give you a little anecdote. My daughter's 6th grade girls basketball coach, volunteer citizen coach, one of her teammates, the dad was one of the major property owners in Cedar Rapids, right? He lost a lot of property in that flood. The good news for him was he could spend $4 million and bring his buildings back. He didn't want to spend $4 million to bring his buildings back, but he could do that. But that damage was real for him too. And as the other disasters of the future unfold, extreme storms, flooding, drought, wildfires, ecological disruptions, which I think is actually the pine bark beetle is one of those early symbols. What happens when we start having ecological disruptions in a place like Iowa and all of a sudden the conditions for growing corn no longer exist? Oops, that's a problem. Well, less ethanol too. Yes, yeah, all right. Anyhow, we're all in this together, and I think that's the compelling national self-interest that will motivate Americans to stand up and say we need to do the right thing, And okay, yeah, we're going to have to deal with the fact that there are fossil fuel companies who I hope many of you are participating personally and institutionally in the divestment movement that 350.org is running. It's a great effort. It's a great effort. But you know what? We've got to deal with the reality that, we've got to deal with the reality of the economic incentives that are currently out there. And if you're going to tell some company, yeah, here's the deal, we've got to stop burning the stuff you own, and they're going to lose money, we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that. But what we can't do is say, oh, we're just going to let them burn it because they have an economic interest in burning it. Fundamentally, we have to say that's wrong and we need to stop doing it. So who else has a question or comment? Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm going to preface my question with a confession. I drove over here tonight for this.
So did I.
I live 10, 11 miles away from the church, and I did ride my bike to work today and biked home and then drove down here. The reason I mention that is because I talk to a lot of people who think that they have to be perfect before they can become active, who think that they have to completely go to solar power, drive an electric car, or get rid of their car altogether and bike. They have to live like this perfect lifestyle, and until they are off the grid and kind of meeting this environmental gold standard, that it's hypocritical to speak up, and it's hypocritical to request change and to organize politically. I don't believe that, and I would like to know how you respond when you hear people say that.
Well, Stephanie, what a great observation. And I believe that personal individual action is important. I think it's important to demonstrate your moral commitment to an issue. But my goodness, you're not asked for perfection before you can act. Let me, in the book, I actually go through a lot of the things personally that I have personally done and my family has done to try to reduce our carbon footprint. And you can see my kids are really unhappy about that. That's a joke. Those are not my children. And I think that's important. I really do. I think the personal commitment is important. But as I say in the book, if I drive home and out of my interest in environmental purity, if I drive home with my sister and we get back to Cedar Rapids and I crawl in bed with my dog and cuddle up with my dog like I like to do, and I never drive again, I could do that. That might make me feel pure. It might make me feel good. It would help a little bit. But it is equivalent to shutting down a single coal-burning power plant for about 25 minutes, assuming I'm going to live my normal life, right? And it doesn't shut down the coal plant. We need people to be engaged as citizens on policy advocacy. This issue is so big and so important, it requires the United States of America to take national action and to lead the world, or at least work cooperatively with the world. But I believe fundamentally we need to lead the world to do something on this. That's really, I think, the answer. And so, yeah, should you do those things personally in your life? Of course you should. Do them. Stephanie, the next vehicle you get, just make sure it gets, at least 50 miles per gallon, right? Try to reduce your driving, but you gotta speak up, right? You gotta do that. It's your acts of citizenship that are gonna make the decisive difference on this issue. I'm gonna give you a little anecdote. Does everybody remember June 30th of 2009 when the United States Congress was voting on the American Climate and Energy Security Act? No, you don't. Well, let me tell you, it was a fiasco. They passed it. They struggled to scrounge up the votes. And my local congressman, one of his staff people, told me, Rob, it was intense. Our phone calls in our local office were 300 against it and 2 in favor of it. and I was one of the 2. Okay? Right? That congressman cast the correct vote anyway. He said, you know what? I've got to do this because taking decisive action against climate change is important. And I know there are people who thought there were other ways that bill should have been structured, but when the chips are down, you got to vote for climate action.
Was he reelected?
Yes. Yes, he was. And they attacked him on it, and he defended himself, and he was reelected. Dave Loebsack. And if you can spell Loebsack, you're in better shape than most Iowans. It spells check as lovesick, but it's Dave Loebsack. And his staff person told me that the calls were intense. Well, we need to reverse that, right? Let's put the pressure on the people who don't want to vote for these acts. Let's get out there and talk to them. And you know, again, I believe they can change their minds. They can change their minds. Americans have the capacity to see what is happening around the world, understand the consequences of their decision, and do the right thing when the chips are down. One of the neat things Citizens Climate Lobby has been doing is they've spent a lot of time, and I don't think this is your situation here necessarily, but in other places they're spending a lot of time trying to work with the majority party in Congress. They got to do it. So they've had 7 meetings with Eric Cantor, and you know, they're working through it. And they're trying to develop a relationship and find a way forward. Well, and they also need to hear some people speaking up in the community and saying it's time for action, and we need action. Who else has a question or comment for the good of the group? Yes, Betty.
Hi, I'm Betty Goebel, and I just wanted to make people aware of some resources that are available locally for projects people could work on, and also some information sources. There's a small group of people, about 8 people, working on a project. The project is called fossilfuelfreedenver.org. That's where you go look for it online. And we're working to try and get Denver to transition to clean, renewable energy at a faster pace than Excel might want us to. The second one is, I hope everyone will be very vocal in their opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline. And if you're interested in becoming more active with that, you can look online, and you might particularly want to look for a pledge of resistance to the Keystone pipeline. There will be some actions being planned locally right here in Colorado that may materialize later in the year if it looks like Obama is going to approve the pipeline. And the final thing is to let people know that there's an organization called the Climate Reality Project, of which I'm one of their presenters, and we do free presentations to any group that would like us to. So those are some resources available to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Betty, and thanks for your work on this issue.
I have a quick question I asked of the minister, which was, what can we do after the meeting that we had? What will make a big difference? And he said, when people can make money doing this, then we will notice the change. Maybe we do have a bottom line mentality that's ingrained in us, and that's the only way that we can go forward. What do you think?
There's no question that we need people to be able to make money, make a living, and be prosperous. There's no question that we need the solutions to work for people economically as well as environmentally. One of the ways you do that is through public policy. And I'm going to give you a really specific example. Colorado, my understanding, most people in Colorado have been pretty supportive of the renewable energy production tax credit at the national level, 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour for renewable energy production. Iowa has been very supportive as well. By the way, that is one of the issues that is why Iowa voted the way it voted in the last elections, because one candidate supported the renewable energy production tax credit and the other candidate for president didn't. And that was one of the decisive issues. And I imagine things were similar in Colorado. Okay, so we're going down to the wire last New Year's Eve, and Congress has not extended it. It is on the brink of expiring once again, and we ought to just make the credit permanent, Why? Not because the industry needs subsidies, but to reflect the health, environmental, and climate benefits of renewable energy versus fossil fuels. We ought to just make it permanent. But Congress, in that fiscal cliff deal last New Year's Eve, included a 1-year extension of the production tax credit and a change in the definition of when a project qualified. You didn't have to have it completed in 2013. It could be under construction in 2013 and it would qualify. That change alone got Mid-American Energy, the largest utility in Iowa, electric utility in Iowa, to commit to doubling its wind power in Iowa this year from 20%, nearly doubling, to 39% of the electricity it produces. It is investing another $1.9 billion in wind turbines in Iowa because of that public policy change. So are the economic incentives important? Yes, they are. So there's no question about that. But how do we influence that? Through public policy. We need public policy focused on the fight against climate change. That's what we need. I think we're going over here. And then maybe 2 or 3 more, Eddie? We're about. Three on queue already. Okay, let's get through the ones in the queue already. And then what I'd like to do, is I want to be able to get people books who want books and sign them. Does that work? Yes.
Great. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
And let me speak as a minister who always talks to choirs. I think the choir needs a heads up. I just read a book this summer called Green is the New Red, that environmentalists are being targeted under the Patriot Act as people who are potential eco-terrorists for disrupting the U.S. economy, our whole way of life, the political system, and I have experienced that. So I think we need to be aware of what that whole scenario is when we are doing this.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the warning. I'll just say thank you for the warning. I don't really. I mean, that's a problem. We don't want Americans targeted. I will also say this. I think we can draw lots of lessons from the civil rights movement. I really think we can. What were people concerned about with the March on Washington? By the way, the 50th anniversary of that will be August 28th, right? Big moment in history. People were concerned, oh my gosh, there's going to be rioting, there's going to be crime, there's going to be violence when you bring all those people to Washington, D.C. They tried to convince King, don't do it, cancel it, don't do it. All the powers that be were saying, here's what we'll do to help instead if you cancel the march. And they said, no, we're going to do it. And they did it, and it was conducted with good order and dignity and inspirationally. And I think we need to continue, I think we need to model that as well so that people can't say these ridiculous things. People are going to say ridiculous things though. You just know, that's the way that this country is, right? There's always going to be somebody out there saying goofy things. And we need to be strong and model what we want to have happen. Who's next? Yes. That would be State Senator Gail Schwartz. Thank you, Senator Schwartz, for coming here.
I just want to help welcome one of my personal champions. We sat at a conference before the last legislative session. It was the NCEL, the National Council of Environmental Legislators. And actually, we worked on some of these issues, and you were talking about climate change at that point in time. We were the first state to pass Architecture 2030, and we have that in statute now, and we are looking at the built environment and a way to find incentives for people to build more responsible homes. And we also put in place a CPACE, which is a commercial PACE, which will provide through a state bonding program incentives and actually financing for renewable and energy efficiency in commercial buildings. So I just want to acknowledge your work, and that we all are doing our piece and are really doggedly trying to make a difference. And it's like the gun bill. Now, if my phone was any indicator, and my overwhelmed, crashing inbox was any indication of where I should have voted on our gun safety bills, I would have not supported them. But it was not an indication of the people in this state that actually supported gun safety. So it is, your voices are overwhelmed when it comes to doing the right thing and being able to communicate with your legislators about what most of us feel. And we want to do the right thing by way of our children and our environment and our climate and our communities. And I just can't reinforce enough that I haven't written a book yet, but I have 1 year left, and maybe then I will write a book. But it is that time. Colorado, as you well know, we had 14 fires in this state about a month ago. We have had an unprecedented fire season, and we will only have more fires because temperatures equal fire. And then also we're losing our water at the same time. This is a real issue for Colorado, and it's a real issue today. And watch for this fall when things are dry and we continue to have fires. I was in the San Luis Valley. We burnt over 100,000 acres of the Rio Grande Basin in about 2 weeks. And now, it's only going to be more and more serious. So if you can help us, because all those doubting Thomases, when we did 252, anyone remember 252? Raising the standard for our renewables and our REAs from 10 to 20. In the Senate, we debated it for 24 hours.
I watched it.
Yeah, thank you. So that's the kind of resistance that is there to do such a logical thing, to come into my communities and actually have the chance to develop biomass and hydro and geothermal. I mean, those are our resources. So just want to, hats off.
Thank you, Senator Schwartz, and thank you for being here, and thank you for your leadership. I understand that Colorado has term limits. Yeah, so you're about to get chopped off. Yeah. She makes a point there about legislators who want to do the right thing. And there are many times legislators who want to do the right thing need support. So you might have, hypothetically, a couple United States senators who you think on climate change currently will probably do the right thing most of the time. You can always push them to do more, but you can also reinforce their desire to do the right thing. And you can also put pressure on people who might not agree with it. And it doesn't have to be pressure. You can, if you've got the time, build the relationship and try to work with them, right? And try to move people. I talk in the book about, I talked earlier in the talk about climate patriots. I talk in the book about the evangelical voices for climate action, which are significant. So, this has the potential to unite people throughout the country. So if you have the opportunity to develop a relationship with somebody who you might think is a little bit skeptical or doubting Thomas, do that. But don't let your inability to take the time to develop a relationship deter you from just speaking up. It really does matter. In this business, there are times when we occasionally have to take hard votes, especially when you're in the majority party. And, because you're working, politics is a interesting kaleidoscope or a web. And all these pieces fit together, and there are times when I've voted for things that I don't necessarily think are particularly good ideas, but I've needed to because it was part of the deal and we had to get it done.